Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I thank the ranking member, and I want to thank my colleague, Senator Baldwin, for working on this issue with the Simkowski family, and it's nice to see both of you again, and thank you for your advocacy and your bravery, really, for just keeping it up, keeping it going. I have a couple questions, and the more I sit here, the more questions I get, because I don't think that what's going on at the VA in terms of conflicts or in not being able to get enough data about opioids is any different than what's going on in the general public. Sometimes we use the VA as a good example of, well, let's do this in the general public, and sometimes we use the general public to say, let's try this at the VA. When my colleague from Arkansas said that they had the second highest opioid prescribing rate, I'm not proud to say that we used to have that distinction in West Virginia. In 2006, we prescribed 129.9 per 100 people, and it's down to 96, which is still not so great. But it does show you that if you begin to monitor and if you begin to keep track and you have accurate records and you shine a light on this, you can improve this situation and you can make a difference. And so I would say that that's an important takeaway from this. But here's where my concern is. If you have a veteran who goes to community care and is prescribed an opioid. First of all, I think we obviously have to fix the loophole that the VA record should be able to reflect that if at all possible. My understanding is they have to fill that prescription at the VA. Is that correct?
What we're actively implementing in response to the Inspector General is, and also in response to Senator Tester's concern about availability, is that if somebody's writing, and we batted back and forth numbers, less than 7 days of an opioid, they can get it at an outside pharmacy. And they can get the first 7 days elsewhere, but then following that, they need to use one of the VA's mail order pharmacies. And that makes it available. But I would point out that the VA uses the state PDMPs and the pharmacies do. And the VA providers are required to check that as well for, in all cases, for chronic prescriptions. So we do have that kind of exchange.
Do you, in every VA, are you monitoring what's going on at the state monitoring drug program?
Yes, I can't say that every single provider, every single time follows each state and VA guidelines, but we're working on it.
Right. So if you have a VA that straddles different states,
of which there are many,
do they
and
avail themselves of every state?
Yes. So
That didn't sound so affirmative there.
I can give you, but it's hard.
I know, because it's reflected in the general public. That's been part of the problem.
North Florida, South Georgia. We have to write because you have to be licensed in South Georgia,
right.
You have to write a consult to somebody who is licensed. So there are two different pieces of legislation going through, and the VA has submitted suggestions to that legislation to allow us to check even in states in which we're not licensed, and to allow surrogates to check for us.
Absolutely have to do that.
My preference would be for an automated system to allow that checking and have to import it into our medical record automatically. That would greatly relieve the reliance on the mechanics of a provider, an MD, getting in, which is a considerable administrative workload.
Well, we should be able to do that. I mean, we need to do that because a lot, as you said, a lot of VAs straddle different, and I understand the licensing issues, but I also understand that in pursuit sometimes the veteran's no different than the general population. In pursuit of medications that maybe they can't get one place, they're going to find out a way to get it. One of the ways I realized they were doing in West Virginia for a time was instead of using their insurance card or their credit card, they're paying cash, and it's not going into the system because it's not set up for that. And I hope we've gotten rid of that loophole as well. I'll just close and say that Andrew White was a young veteran who returned home to his family in late 2007. He went to the VA in Huntington, West Virginia. It wasn't opioids so much, but it was conflicting medicines. He was on a whole cocktail of a lot of different medicines and in tremendous pain, PTSD. He couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. He became a different person. And one day he didn't wake up in his own home. And I'm convinced, as his parents are convinced, and the VA's looked at this too, that the combination of what he was taking was just too much for him. And so I know you've worked hard at the VA to try to look at different conflicts, and this sort of melds into opioids, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's an opioid prescription. It can be the opioid prescription on top of everything else. So I think we can do better. I appreciate your efforts. I do think that if you look at what's going on in the charts of states like mine in Arkansas, where you see improvements, those are the same places you can make improvements through the VA, and our veterans are certainly well deserving of that. Thank you.